All right, so today I want to start a new series called Beyond the OSCP because I want to show for folks who have achieved their OSCP what's the next step to advance your skills in pen testing. So today I'll be going over this POC code, a proof of concept code for a remote code execution for this gym management software system. So this is a quick scan of the code here, but let's get started, right? So okay, so to get started, okay. So first of all, we have a target website. And so if we go, let's like for fun, let's do it all in curl. So it's installed on gym.local and it's installed on port 8080. So we curl it. And so this is at the target site, and then the code for the site comes back. And one of the things you can see here is that according to the code, right, there are references to PHP file. So that is our first clue that we're probably dealing with a PHP web service. So, okay, so what is the interesting part that I wanted from this code? So there's an about. Okay, so that's the start of the code. A bunch of different tags in the HTTP source code. Okay, packages, faculty. But anywho, if you were to sort of go through the code, there will be this contact.php file, right? So let's grab that. So we curl it, and then in this source code, it actually gives us the version of the software. In this case, it's Gym Management Software 101. So for the OSCP, this is usually the methodology you use is you sort of do enumeration, you find out the different software versions. And in this case, after you find out the versions, you can either use exploit search, which searches your local exploit DB database within your Kali image that you have, or you can go and Google it. And if you Google it, this is one of the hits that you would get, right? So basically what we did there was we did a version comparison, and then we found exploit code. And I download that exploit code, and the name of that is this gem.py. So here's the exploit code. So after that, then if for the OSCP, you would just kind of like scan the code here. It looks like it's doing some stuff with PHP, creating a web shell. It looks like, and then the big part here is this the main code. It gives you the usage. And then it creates a session, and it creates some data within a file, and then it finally posts it, right? So for that examination, this is a level of detail that you have to go into. And so with that, right, we have the exploit code called gem.py, and then so you could run it to it gives you the usage. So so it says right here, you run Python, the name of it, and then the web app URL. So in our case, what we have to do is, okay, we have the exploit code. Now we have to figure out what do we put here for this value right here. That's what we have to figure out. And from our previous curl, right? Curl for the site was this URL. So this is what you're gonna put for the web app URL. So let's just copy that real quick, Control A. So Python, gym, and then boom, this. And then so you run it, and then the code does magic, and then lo and behold, you'll notice that the prompt change, and if you run the dir command, right, you have, it shows all the file in this directory right here. And so what this shows you is now we have code execution on that web server. And another really interesting data point that we got from just running the dir file is we see the directory right here. So based on this directory, we can then infer that this web application is running on XAMPP. So that's sort of the framework that it's using. So, a lot of good data. And then from here, we can enumerate further, right, to eventually privilege escalate. So that is what you need to know for the OSCP. So to go a step further than that, what we want to do is we want to get more understanding in detail about how it actually works. So we would actually go into the code in much more detail to figure out, hey, how does this exploit code works and why does it work, right? And luckily for us, from the author who uploaded this POC, he gives really detailed explanation. And this isn't always the case for uploaded POC, but in this case, we're really lucky that the author went ahead and really gave us all the nitty-gritty details of how this actually works, right? And this isn't that readable, but what I did was I went ahead and copied all that into this file so we can see what's happening here, right? So the first part, so to really understand here is like, number one, you have to ask, where does a vulnerability lie? And what is a vulnerability? And according to his notes, he's saying that the vulnerability lies in this upload.php file. And it says, the first problem is that it does not check for an authenticated user session. So that's the first issue with this code itself. So for us, so this is the exploit code, but I also went ahead and I also was able to download the upload.php as well. So this is the target code. And so for you to get a better understanding of how system works and how it's vulnerable, it's really important that you're sort of, number one, understanding how the code actually works, right? So I highly recommend you develop that skill. So this is the code right here. And the first thing he says is that this code does not authenticate user session, right? So let's check it. Let's see what does that mean. So right here, we go to the site. This is the site itself. And, I was telling you about the contact here, right? We go to contact, and then if so, right, this is where we get the software version. So number one, right? So the source file, the PHP file we're talking is this upload.php. So if we go to it, we'll get this error message. But one thing an experienced pen tester will notice is that this shows you, we actually have some kind of code execution. So PHP code is being executed, but it ran into an error. And in this case, it's saying that the ID variable in this source file on line 4, it's not defined. So if we jump back to the source code, right? So what's line number 4? This is line number 4 right here, right? So, excuse me. It's saying that the variable passed to this web session, the user did not set the ID variable, and this is why, excuse me, it aired out on this line, right? And so the next step is like, okay, how do you go about setting this ID? So this is a quick audience participation instruction. What do you for PHP, do you know how do you go about doing that, Dave?
Not entirely,
okay.
But what I would guess is that, and this is just a guess,
Sure.
that maybe can lead the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
That get message that you saw in the code,
yes,
that reminds me a lot of an HTTP message. So there has to be, I'm thinking there's some way that you would construct a curl
yes,
or some kind of HTTP message
yes,
that defines in the get parameter, what is the ID that I need in order to get past to the upload screen?
yes, that's exactly it. So for the URL, like you're saying, you can do it in curl as well. But for the URL here, how to do it is you do the question mark, and then everything after the question mark is a variable. So what we do here, we set ID, and then we say, hey, it's Dave, right? We hit that, and then look, there's nothing that came back. So so this is like, if you have the code, then you could kind of figure it out. So basically what's happening here is like this part of the code executed fine, but then it goes further down into the rest of the code. And the other part of the code is probably where it's erroring out, but in this case, there is no error message, right? So if we go back to the author's notes, go back to the author's notes here, right? So number one is it doesn't check for authentication. And so we sort of already showed how, look, right? If we just do it by itself, we get code execution and we get an error message, but it doesn't check for authentication. So in contrast to that, right, what I want to show is I want to show you a file that does have authentication. In this case, it's edit.php. And if you run into a file that has authentication requirements, this is what you're going to get, right? It's going to prompt you to enter your name. Oh, actually, let me see. Wait a minute. Okay, so that might not be a good example. But anywho, the point here is I'll show you the code of where it does some kind of session check. But I guess in this case, the session check for this isn't that great. But I'm just guessing. Like, we put Dave here, edit details. I'm just curious what will happen. Error. So there's some error message. So I guess something didn't work on in the code itself. But here I want to share and contrast the code, right? So this is the code for our upload.php, and in edit, so I also got the edit, check this out. In edit, it checks you the login details, right? So it checks you for the login details after doing this MySQL I variable, which I believe is set by this by one of these, or I guess it's maybe one of these includes, but maybe not, or in the start session. But anywho, from this variable, it's checking if you're logged in or not, and based on that log, based on this variable, right? It should use it. But let me see. This is probably why. This is funny. Man, this code is really bad. So this is what's happening, right? So they did check in terms of the session variable to see, hey, did you actually log in or not? But it doesn't actually use that variable, right? So the right code here is like, it would do an if statement. If it's log is equal to in, then you do all of this code, right? But in our case, it doesn't check that variable. So this code is not good. Okay, so that was the first point. The second point is setting the ID parameter, and we covered that, right? So you have to set the ID parameter. Okay, the next part of the code, it's going to check the extension. And if it's a part of the right extension, then it's going to allow the code to go further on, right? So let's see how that looks like in the PHP code. And this is how it's doing it right here, right? So these are the allowed extension. You can do a JPEG, GIF, PNG, JPG. And if it's one of those, so that's the extension variable here, and so it grabs your extension, right? And then if it's allowed, then you get to go into the code. So that's the check here. And so how does the POC bypass that, right? So this is how the POC does it. So the POC is Jim, and right here. So the file name that so even though, it wants it to be a PHP file, right? Because PHP file actually has code, it names itself a PNG file at the very end. So that's how it gets past this check right here. Okay, so now let's go to the third check. The third, no, actually we already finished the third check. So the fourth check right here, right? So bypass the file type by modifying the content type of the file parameter to image.png in the post request, and set a p-upload parameter to upload. So there's two things here. One is you have to get the content type to image.png, and the second is you have to set this p-upload parameter. So let's see how it does it in the code here, right? So that's the code itself, and our POC code is here. So this is how it does it right here, right? So number one, it sets the content type to image.pnp, and the second part is it sets that variable p upload. So let's see if we can find that in the exploit code here, right here. So right here, right? So it sets that variable as well. And if you go to the code here, right? This is the first part of the if statement right here. It checks if this variable exists, p upload, and if so, then it goes into this if statement, right? So that's what's happening there. And then to sort of really show this in action, what I did was I did a Wireshark dump of the traffic of the exploit code. So let's see what it looks like on the wire, right? Let's follow the HTTP stream. And so, okay, this is I think the index.php. The blue is what the server sends, and the red is what we send for our code. So this is what we send right here, right? So number one, the very first thing, right? We set this ID, the ID parameter. So we set it to here, kame kameha, and then the other part here, right here, we set this variable called p upload. So we have that in the post. We have p upload, and also the type. Let's see if I can find the type here. Right here. Here's the content type. The content type is image.png. So those two things will bypass that check. So let's see what the next check is, right? So we're done with that, and then after that, we actually put the malicious PHP code to give us code execution in the file parameter. And what else? Okay, so let's see that. So where's the code, right? Here's the code right here. And what is this code telling us right here? So what this code is telling us is that whatever you set as the telepathy variable, it will execute that. So let me show you how that works, right? So, and I believe this will be a curl type command as well. So let's see it in action, right? So let me see here. Let me go, okay. Right, we go back to this guy. Oh, man, my clicking is just, okay, here, let's go back to this one. And let's grab a shell here. This is the exploit code. Okay, so we'll do curl http gem.local port 8080 upload, and the file which we'll go to in a moment here is kameaha.php, and the variable here is telepathy, and the command we want is a dir command. So let's see if I did that right, and check it out, right? We have code execution. So that's how that line in the code works. All right, let's go to the next part now. Okay, so this is really cool here. And so I already showed 7 with that last curl command, right? But number 6 is really interesting right here. So the web application will rename the file to have the extension with the second item in an array created from the file name, separated by the dot character. So that's a mouthful, but let's see what that actually is, right? So let's see what happens here. So what happens? So if you remember, the name of our file is this thing right here, kokin.php.png. But you know, the curl command I did though was this guy right here. It turned to kamehameha.php. Hey Craig, how's it going? So you know, so a question you have to ask is, how did this kaikokin.php.png turn into kamehameha.php, right? And so and that's why you have to really understand the code. So this is the line of code that's doing that right here. So what this is saying is that the temp file that's created when the temp file, so this becomes a file right here. Yeah, so the PHP will turn this file into a temp file, right? And the file name will be kaikokin.php.png. So that's the actual name. It's some temp name. And then what's going to do, it's going to move it, right? It's going to move it to the upload directory. And let's like match that with what we're doing here, right? So if we go back to the command here, you notice I put upload here before the kamehameha. And then let's go to the next section. So and then the rest of the name is the user variable and then the extension. So we have to see what these things are. So here, and this allows some user participation in looking at the code. So what is the name of the user variable?
Is that the ID that's set by the user?
Yes, that's exactly what it is. And let's look at the exploit code, right? So this is the exploit code, and check it out. So what's the ID variable?
Kamehameha.
Exactly. So right here. So we go down to so this right here. So this becomes kamehameha. But this is the part that's tricky. So there's this extension, right? So where does this extension come from? It comes from this code right here, right? So first is the pick variable is set to this this global array called, and then the offset is file.name. And so what this will come out to will be that kaikoken.php.pnp. So that's what pick is. And then this explode command says, give me an array of all the different values, but using this dot as a separator for it, right? So for the kaikoken.php.pnp, the 3 elements of that array will be kaikoken is the first, is offset 0, php will be offset 1, and then png will be offset 2. So those are the 3 members of that variable. And then finally, it says the extension will be the offset 1, the index 1 of that that value. So that's sort of very tricky to follow, but check it out. You can actually verify this within PHP itself. So to run an interactive PHP session, you can run php.a, and now you have an interactive session. And let's just walk through that code, right? So first off is the variable, what is it? Let's go. The variable here is pick. So the pick variable is going to be this guy, right? So that's a pick variable, right? And then the next code here, and then we can verify it by using the echo dot pick, and there's that, right? And then the next one is this code right here, and I can just cut and paste this code, right? So copy, cut and paste that code. So, and then let's see what it is, right? Echo dot conf, right? What did I do? So check it out. So that is an array, right? So, that is an array. So to actually print out the different values, you have to give an index. So this is index 0, right? The very first part. This is index 1, the second part, and then this is index 2, the very last part. So what this code is doing right here, it's saying for index, the second part, which is index 1, that's going to be the extension. And in our case, that is PHP, right? And so that is how it finally gets this final URL here to be kamehameha.php into the upload directory, right? So that's how it works. But then a question you should ask, right, is that our original name for our file is kaikoken.php.png. So the reason we did the PNG for the very end there, right, was to pass this check right here, because this one will only allow if the file name ends in one of these things right here, right? And that's why we did it. But then this is the thing that's kind of like very neat and kind of tricky, right? So, but in the middle here, right, we have this PHP. So, and then luckily for us, it says for the second part of it, that's going to be the extension. So this is the part of the code that has a big assumption here. And this is why we were able to leverage this to have a file called kamehameha.php and just get straight PHP execution. It's because for normal files, they would only expect something like this, right? To have only 2 parts, the file name and then the extension. They didn't expect that we would have other stuff here, right? They didn't expect us to have other stuff here. So because they assume the second part will always be the extension, that's why they grabbed the second part for us. They assume that that's going to be PNG or GIF or one of the other image extensions, right? But we took advantage of by instead of having this be PNG, we had PHP, so we get PHP code execution. So that's how we leverage that to finally get that file name of kamehameha. So those are all the steps, and that's how you can sort of map the POC code with the actual the source code itself, right? That has the vulnerability, which is in this case. And by having this level of understanding, right, you can really understand how to fix it much better. And you also know why it's vulnerable. And if there's sort of a slight modifications through either this code or some of the other defense mechanisms, you'll be able to adapt if the vulnerability is still there but requires some slight modifications, is because you really understand how this vulnerability works. And with that, that concludes my demo and my presentation. And with that, I'll open up for questions, comments, if there are any.
Candy, super awesome demo there. I noticed netcat binary when you listed out the dir. Was that part of the exploit, or was that some of what you've been doing playing?
That's what I've been doing playing. And right here is this is why I uploaded netcat, is so I could have a real terminal and CD. And this, okay, so you brought up that question, so now I get to dig a little deeper, right? So when let's start from scratch, right? So to run this exploit, I run the Python script, and the exploit is gem.py, right? And then, give it a moment, and then it gives me this shell, right? So I could run in some commands, but some other commands, say I want to go to the directory above that, I do that. It just lists it. Wait, okay, let's see what command I did there. Did I do, I did a dir up. So, but if I wanted to go up that directory, CD doesn't work. So a question you would have to ask is like, why is this shell so limited? And some commands work and some command doesn't work, versus a netcat shell, right, which is like equivalent to like almost a local shell. So that's where you have to go back to the POC code. So in the POC code, what it does here is like it uploads that particular Kamehameha shell, and then it runs this web shell function. And let's go to the web shell function, right? So what's the web shell function doing? It's creating the equivalent of a curl URL right here, right, with Kamehameha. It sets the telepath variable, like, remember with ID variable, telepath is another variable, and whatever arguments you give to this quote unquote web shell, it will set the telepathy variable to, and then it will execute it. Right here, the command right here. So it runs this get request, and then it reads from that get request, and then reads the response, and then it puts it to you, right? So basically, what this web shell is, all it's doing is this guy right here, and this is why it's limited, right? It's running shell exec commands, and shell exec is not the equivalent of a local terminal. So that's why this is limited. And as a part of my testing and just mucking around, that's why I eventually uploaded netcat. So I get something a little more nicer to move around and just like look at different things. So yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so that was one point. I'm curious, is there any other points that I wanted to share about that? But yeah, good question. So any other questions?
I'm curious, what's the user? What are you running right now? Can you do a quick who am I or something? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so in this case, the way this particular system is configured, the user, who am I? The user is, so the name of this machine is Buff, and the user is Sean. And it's just one of these boxes, one of these machines on Hackbox that has a vulnerable server. Yeah, definitely.
Cool.
Any other questions? Let's see. Okay, awesome. So with that, I will end.